So today our office is releasing our annual TIF report, and the report provides detailed information on Cook County's 441 active TIFs and the record-setting $1.2 billion in revenue they produced in 2018. That is up from 17.4% from 2017. An amazing number. Do I need to say that again? 1.2 billion, up 17.4%. Now, our office provides transparency regarding TIF revenues and reports this information to the public because of our role in the process. We do not, and I repeat, we do not approve or assess the qualifications of any TIF area, but we are instead responsible for calculating those tax rates each and every year. This office is the one place where TIF revenue for all of Chicago and suburban Cook County TIFs are calculated and maintained, and the place that people can depend on to provide that information. The information on TIFs has not always been so forthcoming from the 100 or so municipalities that employ them. But my staff, and they're here today, works through the year to provide the public with accurate and comprehensive information on TIFs, be it through these annual reports, our online TIF viewer, and on your property tax bill, which will tell you if your property is actually in a TIF district. Now, TIFs are not inherently bad. In fact, if they're done properly, they can spur economic growth by investing money where private capital can't get in. They can help bring development to blighted areas or neglected areas. But too often, that's not how it's been done, and often the process isn't very transparent. Again, my office has no role in determining the worthiness of a TIF district, nor in monitoring or managing where TIF revenue goes. But sometimes it's hard to argue that a proposed TIF area is, quote unquote, blighted. From my own experience in my own community, I've witnessed the system being abused. For instance, by companies getting benefits for a TIF, then they pack up and leave just as soon as the 23 years expires, or by municipalities that limit public input on the process. Now, what I'd like to do is acknowledge the tireless advocacy on behalf of taxpayers that my predecessor, David Orr, dedicated himself for many, many years. And I pledge to do my part to continue this transparency in government that taxpayers should expect from this process. Our goal is for everyone to be more informed, and right now I want to turn this over to our tax extension manager, Tanya, to provide you some more details on the report and answer any questions that you might have. Tanya?
So as Clerk Yarbrough just announced, today we are releasing our 2018 TIF report. Now, TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing, and TIF districts are a tool used by cities and villages to spur economic development in areas that the municipality has determined is either blighted or in need of conservation efforts. Back in June, our office released our annual property tax rate report. So every year, our responsibility as the clerk's office is to calculate the tax rates for all taxing districts in Cook County. We do that by taking the total tax amount that the taxing district is requesting each year from their property tax levy and dividing it by the total taxable value in the taxing district, the equalized assessed value, or EAV, to get a tax rate for every taxing district. We then take that tax rate and we multiply it by the individual taxable value of each property to get the tax bill amount for each property. So for TIFs, cities or villages don't ask us for a specific amount each year. Instead, we calculate the amount that TIFs are entitled to receive each year. And the way that we do that is when a TIF is filed with us by a city or a village, the clerk's office determines how much value is in the TIF at the time the TIF was adopted. And we take that value and we freeze it for the life of the TIF, which is typically 23 years. So during that 23 years that the TIF is active, any tax revenue that's generated off that frozen value within the TIF goes to the taxing districts. Any value that's generated off any growth in the TIF throughout the life of the TIF goes directly to the TIF fund. And that TIF fund is then administered by the individual city or village that established that TIF. So this year in Cook County, there are 441 active TIFs. They're bringing in, as Clerk Yarbrough said, a record $1.2 billion. This is actually a 17% increase over last year's record number of $1 billion. And when we compare this to the total amount of tax that's billed in Cook County this year, the total amount of tax was $14.9 billion, taxed to all properties in Cook County for all taxing districts. So that $1.2 billion for TIF is 8% of that total. So 8% of all of the tax in Cook County is going to TIF. In the city of Chicago, where 1 in 4 properties is in TIF districts, that percentage is 13% of the total tax billed in the city of Chicago going to TIF. In the suburbs, where 1 in 22 properties is in a TIF district, that's 4% of the total tax billed in the suburbs going to TIFs. So over here, we actually have this first closest map is a map of where the 10 highest revenue TIFs in the city of Chicago are located. As you can see, most of them are located near or around the Central Loop Business District, with a couple of exceptions. The TIF number 1 up there is the city's Transit Tif, the red-purple modernization Phase 1 TIF, the RPM 1 Transit TIF. So this TIF is 3 years old and is now generating almost $116 million in just its 3rd year as a TIF. Now, transit TIFs are slightly different from other TIFs in a couple of ways. There's no blight requirement to establish a transportation TIF. Additionally, the transportation TIF can run for 35 years, and they're intended to fund public transit projects. The other thing that makes transit TIFs different is what happens to the TIF revenues once they come in. Not all of the revenue goes to the TIF itself. For a transportation TIF, part of the revenue goes back to the taxing districts. CPS, the City of Chicago, the Park District, Cook County all get a portion of that total $116 million coming in from the Transit TIF this year. We have more information, more detail about the Transit TIF in our TIF report. There's a Transit TIF fact sheet that's got more information about the Transit TIF. The second map over there is the location of the 7 highest TIFs in revenue this year for this the suburban Cook County. And as you can tell, so they're mostly either in the northern suburbs, Glenview, or the northwestern suburbs, Hoffman Estates or Schaumburg, Rosemont, or then in the near west suburbs, Oak Park and Cicero. So, as I mentioned earlier, the total TIF revenue in Cook County is up 17% this year. When we break this down by the city and the suburbs, however, we see that in the city, TIF revenue is actually up over 27%. So last year, TIFs in the city of Chicago brought in $660 million. This year, they'll be bringing in over nearly $841 million. This is primarily due to the fact that the city of Chicago was reassessed for tax year 2018, and the total EAV for the city of Chicago increased 12.5%. So how does a 12.5% increase in value correspond to a 27% increase in TIF revenue? Well, that's due to the way that TIFs work. As I mentioned before, when a TIF is established, we freeze the value of the TIF for the other taxing districts. So when the total EAV within a TIF goes up, the total value goes up, that total increase, all of the increase is going to the TIF, while the other taxing districts are still getting revenue from the frozen value. We have a chart on page 4 of our executive summary of our press release, which has a little graphic which illustrates this a little bit better than I can do standing here. And then in the suburbs, what we actually saw with TIF revenues was about a 1.6% decrease in TIF revenue. Last year, suburban TIFs brought in a total of $344 million, and this year, suburban TIFs will be bringing in about $339 million. It's about a 1.6% decrease. This is due primarily because the suburbs were not reassessed this year, and we typically see just moderate EAV reductions in non-reassessment areas. It's pretty common. However, the north and northwestern areas of Cook County, of the suburbs of Cook County, anything north of North Avenue, is currently being reassessed for tax year 2019. And so those reassessments will be reflected on the second installment tax bill next year, right around this time. So there's actually quite a bit of variability happening with all of the TIFs in Cook County. There's 441 of them. Some of them are seeing increases in their revenue. Some of them are experiencing decreases in their revenue. We have a lot more detail in our TIF report itself. We have other information in there as well. We have an executive summary. We have a quick facts page, some frequently asked questions, the Transit Tif fact sheet that I mentioned, as well as an overview of the city and the suburbs and some TIF maps. In addition to that, the clerk has a number of tools online that are available to make things more transparent and to make more information available to the taxpayers. And these include our TIF View mapping application. It's an interactive map that shows all of the TIF boundaries in Cook County, all the active TIFs in Cook County, as well as the amount of money that those TIFs are bringing in this year and in all the prior years. And all of that data is downloadable. So we also have a TIF property lookup tool, and there's a handy 5-minute video with an overview of understanding TIFs. And finally, as Clerk Yarbrough mentioned, our intention is to provide an overview of what's happening with TIFs and to provide transparency of the information that we maintain in our role in administering TIFs. If you have questions about how individual TIF funds are being used, we encourage you to reach out to your city or village to find out how they're utilizing that TIF revenue that's coming in. This is actually the end of our prepared remarks, so we can open it up to questions, unless Clerk Yarbrough, you have anything else you'd like to say?
No. Be happy to answer any questions.